Good afternoon, everyone, and a very good morning to those joining us from European time zones. This is the inaugural event in our SG Declares and Shares series.
So what we can do next is basically identifying targets, determining what kind of values and what kind of measurables we would peg each project on.
Must have a professional stand. We cannot preserve the status quo. If we do, we need to really be comfortable with the fact and accept the responsibility that comes with the decision that we are preserving the root causes of this socio-ecological crisis.
Quote here, Denis Gabor, who said that the future cannot be predicted, but futures can be invented.
One thing we do know is that there is no planet B.
We need to go out and connect with things that are already happening and use our multiplicity of skills and capabilities to help them do better. Don't make any expectations about knowing what the answer is, but start the conversation.
Something that can be done and should be done quickly is to have the regulating agencies to allow for more performance-based evaluation exemption.
It shows you, in a way, in a build statement, the idea of a complete integration of nature and architecture.
You know, if we're looking at preserving buildings from the late 80s and 90s, I think the concrete quality was very good. So it may also give developers more confidence to retain structures, at least when they redevelop.
It's clear that we're a long way from this ideal at the moment, but we're absolutely convinced that it is possible for everything that humans to do to have a net positive impact.
And the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the flaws of macho leadership styles and may mark the end of human exceptionalism, the idea that humans can somehow exist outside the laws of physics and biology.
Just to see example below, in the sea level rise, around 46 million people will be impacted in 2100 at 1.5 degree temperature rise.
In our perspective of that, the current climate leadership, even with the best of targets, are not bringing us towards a 1.5 degree world. And there are critical tipping points in terms of our biosphere that are being reached.
What we then suggested was that we all need to see, as individuals, as companies, as neighborhoods, as countries, where we are in this matrix, and aim to move one level up at least. That is the sculpture that we are having at the moment, and one needs to try and push the bulk of the load up to the top.
Get here, and I think suffice to say that we do put a lot of emphasis on planning and planning for the long term. And much of this stems from the constraints that we face as a nation with land constraints that we have.
Okay, the practice of landscape architecture saw significant shifts as urban developments intensify, densities increase, built environments extend vertically, and public and open spaces actually stretch from ground level infrastructure to elevated social spaces in the sky.
It was really about changing mindsets, right? Making people aware of our water as natural resources, right? And enhancing the value of green and blue infrastructure in Singapore.
And when you're able to hone this skill, it's not about drawing beautifully or sketching fantastic perspectives, but it is about doing it accurately so that your ideas can be conveyed in the way that you want them to be.
This discussion of ecology as an integral part now moving forward of any part of our development, whether it's big, small, and it represents a nation's biocapacity, represents the productivity of its ecological assets.
These paradigm shifts open up new approaches to understanding what scientists would never have considered valid before.
When it comes down to the built environment, right, you know, where are we heading? Do we throw to sort of acclimatize and trying to adapt to a changed world?
But I think I'm struck too by, I think, probably everything you showed us today. No one's ever paid you for any of that. I mean, that is a research that's going on that you are funding yourself?
Nobody pays for the research and the experimentation and the effort and the test evaluation. But we do it because it is for the betterment of the environment. It is, we do it for environmentally altruistic reasons.
To seeing you, all the participants. Please spread the word, and thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those joining us from any of the European time zones. We had 10 successful sessions of the SG Declares and Share series. You've just seen a beautiful little summary. And in this 11th session, the Success Stories edition, we have invited signatories to share their environmental and regenerative success stories, challenges that were faced, experience that was gained, innovations as well as changes they implemented since signing the Built Environment Declaration over 2 years ago. In the way of a brief introduction, Built Environment Declares is an online petition uniting all strands of construction and the built environment. It started in May 2019 and now has over 9,200 signatories, significantly companies, in various disciplines and in 28 countries across the globe. In early January 2020, Singapore joined the movement with Singapore architects, structural engineers, environmental consultants, and landscape architects signing the declaration. Today, we have Sarah Ichioka as our moderator, who I will hand over to shortly so she can introduce our 6 prolific speakers. You may remember Sarah Mineko Ichioka from some of our earlier sessions. She is a strategist, urbanist, curator, and writer. She is founding director of Desire Lines, a consultancy for environmental, cultural, and social impact organizations and initiatives. She is co-author of Flourish, Design Paradigms for Our Planetary Emergency, published in 2021 with Michael Pauling. Ichioka has been recognized as a World City Summit Young Leader, one of the Global Public Interest Design 100, and a British Council Claude Duffield Cultural Leadership International Fellow. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Shirin, for that very generous introduction. And I'd also like to thank Wan Sing for her amazing behind-the-scenes efforts to herd all of us cats together today for this really important moment of reflection and celebration. I think that so often in professional life, or maybe life generally, we can get so fixated on the targets ahead, and especially when it comes to the climate and biodiversity crisis that we all face. Those are so urgent, right? Every new news report reminds you of the urgency, but I think if we're ever going to build up the stamina and the sense of community that's required to surmount these challenges we've created for ourselves, taking this time to reflect together and to celebrate achievements and accomplishments in a supported manner is really important. So congratulations, heartfelt congratulations from me to all the signatories who've formed this tight-knit community of support and sharing over the last 2 years and 10 sessions. Every single one of the 6 panelists you'll hear from today has a more impressive CV than I do, but in the interest of time, I'm actually only going to give them a 1-line introduction, and Wan Sing will be dropping their bios into the chat. So please do take the time to read. If you're not familiar with them already, they all have very impressive backgrounds. But I am just going to prioritize having time together afterwards over sharing them verbally. The way we're going to structure this, again, we've got 6 presenters. We need to be conscious of time. I'll just be introducing them one by one. They will then take the stage, spend no more than 5 minutes sharing what they and their firm or organization have achieved since signing the declaration. And then we will circle back to hopefully having at least 20 minutes for discussion as a panel. I have a few questions to structure, but please, we also really welcome audience participation. If you could hold your questions in the chat until we get to the discussion phase, I find that's always really a respectful way to make sure that everyone's focus stays on the speaker rather than getting caught up in whatever's happening on the chat. But please, once we do open to that Q&A session, go wild, and we'd love to hear your questions. So first, I thought we could start off with a big picture mindset shift perspective, and no better to share that with us than Leonard, who is a landscape architect and urbanist who serves as country director of Ramboll, Singapore. Over to you.
Thank you for the kind introduction, Sarah. I'll now share my screen. Let me know if you see it. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'd like to start this presentation with a reference to COVID. When COVID first hit us in 2020, the world changed. But not everything changed for the worst, right? One of the things that it quickly became apparent was the improvement in air quality. This picture is from New Delhi, showing the gateway in New Delhi, and it showed the stark contrast between pre-COVID and during COVID. And this was really as the result of reduction in travel and as a result of reduction in pollution. Not just in India, all over the world, every city measured significant reduction in pollution, therefore improving the environment. I woke up in 16th of June and saw this in Channel News Asia headlines. It is weird that it took a pandemic, right, to make us think about reimagining our cities to be cleaner and greener. As a result, of the lack of human intervention, right, you see the wild coming back. And this picture is taken in front of the Parliament Hall, showing the landscape that is normally very curated and very well maintained, showing a different wilder side. And it's not necessarily worse. In fact, in many ways, it is better, right? This wild, natural look, showing, allowing nature to do its own thing. And we also, during the COVID event, we also discovered that the parks and the green infrastructure were not luxury. They were actually necessities. It was a place where we could escape from the confinements of home, right? Where we can have some, semblance of our normal life. It was our escape from this crazy pandemic. But the pandemic itself highlights a larger problem, which is climate change, right? And climate change is brought on by human actions. But for many of us, especially in Singapore, right, climate change seems far away, right? The things that we hear in news. But it is more than just news. Climate change is real. And it requires active participation from all of us because it affects all of us. From a Ramboll point of view, right, it has brought about a lot of introspection in the last few years. The developments, the effects to the environment has been a topic of serious concern. And we have decided to refocus on sustainability and the 4 themes of decarbonization, resource management, and circular economy, resilient societies and livability, and biodiversity and ecosystem. Using these 4 themes, right, to be a central approach to how we deal with clients, right, how we look at projects, right, how we do our business. This is one project that demonstrated this approach, where we are working on an opportunity for coastal defense, looking at creating water resiliency using integrated water management with coastal protection, and seeing how we can use these opportunities, right, to embed nature-based solutions to create new typologies, new opportunities for new urban developments. That will find a balance between the needs of man, urbanism, and the needs of nature to create a new future for our kids. I also took this opportunity to relook at the climate declaration that was embarked on by the landscape architectural firms in Singapore. We published this declaration in November of 2020, right? And it was a 13-point action plan. And after reading through this action plan, I realized that we can do much more as a profession. So my question, my ending statement to all the participants here is, what more can you do? Because the world needs your help. With that, thank you. Pass on to Sarah.
Thanks so much, Leonard. I really want to return to that provocation in our group discussion. Next up, we have Joe Lam, who's trained as a structural engineer and serves as associate principal and property business leader at Arup Singapore. Over to you, Joe.
Thanks. So I think since Arup became Signatory a couple of years ago, we see more developers, when they're considering redevelopment, they are more open to it for different use. So for Arup, we are able to share our project experiences around the world, especially those in UK, because many of these redevelopment has been completed in the past few years. We share with them the success, not only the success part of it, but also the challenges, and help them to visualize what is possible for this project. And in the infrastructure space, we have pilot whole life carbon assessments. This is, we not only measure the embodied carbon for the structure, for the different structural scheme, but also the operational carbon as a result of a vehicle using throughout the life of it. So some of the options might be a clear win when you're just considering embodied carbon, but when you consider also the operational carbon, other option might be better. I think this one give ourselves a kind of more perspective about how we should adopt, or we should choose option next time for infrastructure project. Arup, we have created an Arup carbon tools which can import BIM models into it. And within a few clicks, we can find out the total embodied carbon for the structure. And the most powerful thing is you can visualize the contribution for different elements. We help us to actually pinpoint the particular elements and find ways to lower. And another which is going to roll out later this year. And the best part is we are trying to make it open source so everyone can download and use it. So this can also cover facade, and we are trying to explore putting MVP system in this tools as well. So with the experience we have and the tools we got, so all competition projects, and for some selected projects during the concept and schematic stages, we'll do the embodied carbon counting for the different structural scheme and present to our clients, even though it's not something they're asking for it. We want to raise awareness about this topic to them and to let them know, other than cost or program, there's actually another parameter they should consider. Timber is definitely one of the most sustainable material, but unfortunately it's not suitable for all buildings. So concrete and steel will be here to stay. So it is important for us to explore the use of low embodied carbon concrete and steel. And to do that, we are currently conducting a study to answer a few questions. such as, is there suppliers in Singapore supplying these? If so, is there any difficulty for them to scale up for productions? Any price premium and any different in performance versus the conventional material? Hope the finding of these studies will promote or help our practitioner or even developers to adopt this low carbon material in their projects. So structural engineers, there's a lot we can do during the delivery stage of the project, but there's also a lot can be done at the planning stage from our planners. So this is what our advisory team has worked with C40 cities to set the Bureau a set of guidelines for planners to follow and to tackle climate change for these cities. So I do believe for us to have a best impact or the most impact to climate, all practitioners should work together through various stages of the project. Yeah, that's all for me. Thanks.
Thank you, Joe, and
Thank
thanks
you,
for
Sarah.
being
Yeah.
so conscious with our time. I love that the idea of how you're working to build the ecosystem through sharing knowledge and tools. Next up, we have Huimin Chan, who is director at DP Architects, where she leads sustainability and digital twin adoption efforts. Huimin, please.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, great. Okay, right. So thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this panel. Today I'll be discussing the carbon dilemma in adaptive reuse. And thank you, Joe, for outlining so clearly the two carbon equation. But first, I wanted to explain that DP is actually a signatory of Built Environment Declares 3 times over: DPA, DP Engineers, and DP Sustainable Design. And as many versions of it is launched, DP will fully support it. And so, as you can imagine, we become quite stressed when it comes to like, what have you done about your declaration? What have you been talking about, and what have you been doing? And this this more comprehensive view internally of looking at sustainability, having signed the declaration many times over, has pushed us to create a multidisciplinary approach towards achieving sustainability goals. And one of them, of course, is climate change resiliency. And that has been a very positive step for us, uniting us and putting the right domain experts in the right category so that we can deliver on the sustainability outcomes. And when we say domain experts, we also include the friends from the Built Environment Declares network. I mean, a lot of the stuff that I'm showing today was done in collaboration with Arup and AECOM. So let me just, without further ado, go into the body of my discussion today. So looking at embodied and operational carbon, and the research has shown that it's almost 50-50. You have to take care of both embodied and operational carbon when you are trying to reduce carbon, a journey towards net zero. And when you look at adaptive reuse, there is a clear case for adaptive reuse as a key strategy to reduce embodied carbon. Because looking at standards, in particular for residential and commercial office buildings, which is quite a large proportion of buildings that we have in the stock, not just in Singapore, but around the world, the embodied carbon component is actually a little bit more than 50%. And out of the embodied carbon component, over 80% of it is carried in the structure and the facade. So Joe is a little bit too humble by saying that structures can help a little bit. It helps a lot. In fact, that's quite a major component that we talk about and think about all the time. If you look at how people look at whole of life carbon, and this is the RICS whole of life carbon standard these days, and we are looking at the BCA standards as well as the LETI benchmarks to try and understand how much can we save when we look at adaptive reuse. Essentially, the amount of carbon savings, embodied carbon savings you can have is directly related to how much of the building you retain. It's very, very shocking, the magnitude of it in the superstructure, the structure, and the facade. In fact, I mean, the use of, for the ID and the architectural, you can work very hard and be zero over there. If you don't deal with structures and facades, it's very, very hard to achieve zero carbon. So adaptive reuse is really a key strategy. However, with adaptive reuse, it's practically impossible in Singapore today to achieve net zero operations. Why is that the case? Because balancing the key carbon reduction strategies for embodied carbon and operational carbon, some of them kind of are in conflict with each other. For instance, in order to be operationally optimized, there will be some space reconfiguration required so that you can optimize on, for instance, maximizing natural ventilation, innovative types of cooling, and so on and so forth. And if you are kind of stuck with a certain structural configuration, it will limit that. It's very difficult to balance the two. And then also, we don't really have a kind of easy way to adopt on-site renewable energy on our buildings. And so you can see when you have a certain kind of fixed footprint, fixed structure, there will be some limitations to how much you can do with operational carbon. So last slide, what can we help to encourage, to balance, to keep this balance? At least try to understand more. And in our research and investigation, we have found that many people opt to rebuild from scratch instead of going for adaptive use because there's not enough information. There's not enough information on buildings, especially those that are built 20, 30 years ago. And we can at least start by having better archival documentation about built works, and so that we can now crack this balance, embodied versus operational carbon. So with this here, I'll leave the slot with you. Thank you very much for inviting me today. Look forward to our discussion later on.
Thank you very much, Yuman. You've raised a really important point for us to think about the need to really ground our action in evidence, right? And you're putting really clear numbers to help us understand some of the trade-offs or sliders that need to be navigated to take substantive action going forward. So thanks for that. Next up, we welcome Sripragas Nadaraja, who is an environmental engineer and a senior associate at Web Earth, in addition to being an adjunct lecturer at the BCA Academy. Over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think you and Kui Min brief enough about the embodied carbon and the operational carbon. So to see where's the carbon in the building, of course, the two areas, the embodied and the operational carbon. Here, I'm going to talk more on the embodied carbon because everyone recently is to talk about the embodied carbon, because we started to talk the operational carbon quite a long time back, and then is every nation we are trying to achieve the net zero in the operation ASAP before the embodied carbon. So embodied carbon also is important. So we have to see that during the design stage is the best time to reduce the embodied carbon of the building, and to understand, of course, the embodied carbon calculation is cover all the material within in the building to calculate the embodied carbon, but to understand, so where a more impact actually. So it's 70% of the embodied carbon is associated with the co-structural material. So during the design stage, it's good to focus on the reduction in the embodied carbon of the structural material. So our commitment to reduce the embodied carbon 8% year-on-year till 2030. So it means that by 2030 is reduce the embodied carbon by 50%. To achieve this, our team is focusing on the design optimization using the computational design tool, and then the option study to measure the carbon footprint of the building, and then carefully look at the material selection and also the construction and methodology. So our commitment to measure the embodied carbon of all our project from the design stage to the completion, to measure and study the option to reduce the embodied carbon, mainly about the structural embodied carbon up from A1 to A3 in the life cycle carbon assessment. IPSUM is a carbon calculation tool developed by BEP, and it's won the Asia Design for Asia Award in 2020. It's a carbon tool. It is a plugin for Revit. So it's an intent to develop this tool to facilitate designers to measure the embodied carbon quickly and optimize the design. Okay. So it's a plugin. Once we have the Revit model, is the one click, it will read the material quantity from the Revit model, and based on the carbon factor assigned, is give the result. Of course, it allows the designer to change the carbon factor based on the recycled material and other material quantity. Is give the carbon footprint of the building, kilogram CO2 E per meter square. So they can cross-check with the benchmark actually. So the version 1 of the IPSUM is the result is showing 7 material and then 5 major categories of the building. We would like to introduce our regenerative design chart, which is still a work in progress. We started, there are 16 regenerative design concepts. These translated to 16 ecological parameters in the regenerative design chart. So we have the regenerative design chart, and then based on the intensity of each parameter, we scale it from 1 to 10, which is, this would help us to understand how the parameters being considered during the different stage of the design. So this one is help to create a database for the project to see that at each stage of the project, the consideration of the 16 ecological parameter, how it addressed during the design. Thank you.
Thank you, Prakash. It's again, I see this thread of generosity of sharing for many of you, and also really appreciate the way that you brought out for us how multifaceted these design challenges are, and how each one is going to require specialized expertise in order to work through. So thanks again for that. We now have Dr. Tiong Guan, or TG, who is Deputy Managing Director of WSP Singapore with a background in geotechnical consultancy works. Over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. Good day to all of you. I think first of all, I would like to thank the organizer to invite us to share our success story. And you can see from my first the slides here, the main spirit of our declaration is that we are committing to strengthen our working practice to create structural engineering outcomes that have more positive impact on the world around us. But because my background is more on the geotechnical and ground engineering, I would take it that the engineering outcome should also encompass the both the structural and geotechnical design as well. So in view of the times, I will just give you a snapshot of 3 projects that's undertaken by WSP over the past few years on how we actually act on what we pitch in these aspects. Of course, in our commitment, we seek to collaborate with architects, with clients, engineers, and contractors to further reduce the construction waste. And this example is actually the East Coast Integrated Depot, where the WSP has been appointed by the LTA, the client, as a civil, structural, mechanical, and electrical consultant for the projects. And as you can see, due to the space constraint and due to the land optimization requirements, we actually squeeze a lot of things on this plot of land. And this is actually integrated facility where a bus depot and a train depot complex is all combined to this land, in which we have, beside the bus depot, we have 3 train depot, namely the downtown line, the Thomson East Coast line, and East West line. And this is the first of its kind in the world. Yeah. The downtown line depot is located underground, and this building on the north. And the Thomson East Coast line is at grade, whereas the East Coast line is actually at the elevated level. And the bus depot is situated by sides, and they are independent from each other's. There are many future-ready features, as I've listed down on the bullet point on the left. One of them is a green roof. The roof has been designed with a combination of green roof and the photovoltaic cell or solar panels. Both of these strategies will help reduce the potential heat island effects caused by the exposed roof. And of course, the green roof will assist in reducing the stormwater runoff, increase urban biodiversity, and the solar panel cell will produce renewable energy, yeah, which will help to reduce the daytime peak energy demands. And the bus depot is also future-proof by providing the infrastructure provision for future electric buses charging points, which in line with LTA intention to reduce the carbon footprint of the public transportations. And of course, in addition to that, the building has also been designed to take into consideration the natural ventilation, the natural smoke vents, and so on. And as part of the Sustainable Construction Initiative, recycled concrete aggregates are also being used in these projects. This is a map of Singapore. If you have not known by now, the land area of Singapore has actually been increased by up to 24% since the independence through the land reclamation. This map basically shows some of the possible future land reclamation. And the target is to add another 10% of our land up to 2030. Of course, all this work, we have created some environmental issue, of course, including the construction issue ourselves. So I'm going to share an example of project that we have been involved in one of the land reclamation in Tuas, where in this particular project, the embankment has to be created around the area where we need to reclaim the land. And this embankment has to be seated or founded on a sand quay. The sand quay has to be dredged, the marine quay has to be dredged, and the sand quay has to be placed, compacted properly, and as a foundation for the embankment, so that the infill material could be then reclaimed behind the embankment. But because of a shortage of sand, sand is such a valuable commodity, because shortage of sand, contract come to us also alternatives, and we actually work together with the stakeholders and come up with alternative design in which instead of dredging the clay and replace it with sand as a foundation, we actually think of a way to improve the clay, under the in situ clay layers, by using ground improvement technology, what we call inserting some PVD and surcharge to increase the strength of the soft clay beneath the embankment so that it's strong enough to carry the weight of the embankment. Yeah? That reduces the use of sand by up to 800 cubic meters. As you're going deeper and deeper, obviously there's a need to build more and more underground structure, and obviously a requirement to have more robust shoring system and time and cost implication and impact to surrounding. Alternative is to use a small sustainable, a circular shaft, coffer dam, which have we have applied it in the Towell water reclamation plant, in which up to 80-meter excavation are going to be carried out on this five shafts. So with that, I think with some technology and innovation in the design, we are able to actually reduce a lot of these carbon footprints. Yeah, I think just because of time, I'll just share out this three project. Back to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Dr. TG. I think we're seeing the range of interdisciplinary approaches, right? And very different perspectives that our panelists bring to this conversation. I noticed that both you and Prakash introduced the term regenerative, and I'd like to propose that the next session, if the organizers would consider having a next session about where we can get into the weeds about how we actually define regenerative, I think would be really, really fruitful. But keeping us on track, our final panelist today before we move to discussion is Benjamin Towell. He is the author of the Green Book, published by the Singapore Institute of Architects, and has served as Deputy Director at the Building and Construction Authority. Over to you, Benjamin.
Thanks very much. So I guess it's gone full circle in many ways, as the first episode of SG Declares and Shares was actually talking about the Green Book. So it's been a couple of years, coincided with Construction Declares. So how is it going so far? Well, first of all, the book itself does talk about the climate crisis. It puts it in a way which is easy to understand the role and responsibility that us in the built environment have, specifically architects. Beyond that, it also starts to join a few of the dots to highlight that, we're not in it alone. We're a big part of it, but we're not in it alone. And there are some changes happening on a global scale, which deals with international environmental law, the finance sector, which is now where I've, funnily enough, moved to after my time in BCA. So all of this is coalescing, and this is actually a good pivot and an agent of change which can infiltrate our practice and allow us to push further than ever before. And that understanding has really started to manifest in our practices. And we're seeing that even in the policymaking sphere, that this kind of understanding of the role of finance, the national determined contributions that Singapore has put forward and others have put forward, how they're starting to manifest into changes, and how the private sector is a key owner of the delivery of that. And it's becoming, everyone is now really aware, going back to one of the earlier presentations. So now it's, how do you translate that awareness into concerted and real actions? The book brings it all back to the tropics, where we work, in particular the ASEAN region, and obviously with focus on Singapore. And it shows that, yes, whilst we're very comfortable now, the truth is we may not be in the future. So how can we adapt? How can we be resilient and look at regenerative projects that enable that? And the book then kind of within the pages of it really highlights some of the best projects that we have here by our local architectural practices. And it really brings that to life, the richness of creativity that we have and the local vernacular for the tropical region, for the urbanized tropics that we have. So we do have, and we do start to celebrate some of those initial responses to the climate and biodiversity crisis that we face. All of this knowledge was trying to be pulled together in a framework which allows us as professionals to easily communicate and organize our work, our projects, and our practices around it. So it's not about being helpless and powerless. It's about that narrative of, actually, we do have a role to play. This is a framework, not a rating tool. This is a framework which allows us to practice in that way. And so we created the Environmental Design Guidelines, which are a translation of various different frameworks from the New Urban Agenda all the way through to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and how that can impact your practice and how that can impact your projects. And it was a collaborative effort to distill it into the 7 EDGs that you have here, and it took precedence from the original 11 that we had published earlier. So it brings it all together, and building on from what we've heard earlier, it is about that education integration, how we use our agency as professionals to educate and integrate this knowledge into all stages, whether it be your practice, whether it be your project team, your client, your contractors, whether it be your friends and relatives. It allows you to kind of discuss that and then build that snowball effect, which then allows the integration of the other EDGs to take place, both again in your practice and in the project. And we're seeing how more and more projects are, for example, if you look at climate action or resource management, are hitting higher carbon reduction goals. Whilst it's a transition, they are moving further. We saw from Hui Min's earlier presentation exactly that in terms of adaptive reuse. And these kind of conversations are taking place at all levels. As mentioned, it's really important that when the book was written and conceived, it's about the implementation. Another framework that just sits there as an ideological reflection point is not going to deliver what we need. So having the EDGs as a part which will form, and I understand, you know, some of the evaluation criteria later on for future awards and things like that, means that they become quite prevalent. How other professions can start to tap onto them, so we all start to speak the same language. It's really important. And how that we have our practices, not just at the project level, but they are distilled and utilized at the practice level as well. So how do you gear up your practice for that? And signing the Construction Declares Pledge, for example, is one of those things which, again, gives the impetus of actually my culture of practice needs to change. I can't any longer continue to just do this because it brings fees to the table, but how can I improve each and every project to the state that I actually influence my clients and everyone else? And exactly as the nice little video finished on in the first session when it showed the highlight reel, it boils down to no longer what we can do, it's now what we must do. And that those steps of actualization from being aware to acting and to being an agent is taking place. And at the moment, we're probably still on the acting phase, but hopefully as we continue to progress, and the Green Book can help provide that kind of framework for us all to be agents of change in our practices and in our projects. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Benjamin. And it's great to get the grounding for all of the technical discussions that have come earlier in the broader context of, as you mentioned, international policy and law, and now finance as well, your new bailiwick. We only have about 12 minutes if our allocated session. I don't know, we might be able to run over, say, 5 minutes, but we're going to keep it pretty close. I think we've already heard in a really heartening way. Could I invite everyone back onto the stage? Yeah, if you could just see your lovely faces. I think we've already heard some great examples of how membership or being part of this family of signatories has really enhanced your collaborations and interactions with your fellow signatories. So I wanted to move to ask instead, perhaps maybe can everyone except Benjamin, so everyone who's wearing a consultant hat, could you share some examples of how being a signatory has helped to change or evolve your interactions with your clients, either private sector or could be stakeholders from government as well, or indeed other project stakeholders? How has it changed the way that you're communicating externally? Anyone who feels moved?
So Sarah, I'll start. Although we consistently communicate this in our collaterals, to be honest, people don't really get it. But what being a signatory has really moved us from an objective person to a subjective person. We've committed ourselves to do something, so therefore we have to act on it. Otherwise, the external parties will look at us, especially the other co-signatories will look at us and say, what have you done? And I think that was the biggest change from an objective, like, look, we all have to contribute to climate change, to we have to contribute to climate change resiliency. That's the biggest move.
Wonderful. That's really powerful. Does anyone have another response they want to share in that respect?
From our
Leonard?
point of view, it's made us more discriminating about who we work with, who we partner with. Right? We seek partners with shared philosophies and emphasis on climate change. So if we find a client do not share the same ambitions, then we will typically now turn down the project. So it has made us very much more conscious about who we want to work with.
Thank you. And could I ask a follow-on question to that? Do you share with them why you're turning down the work?
Sometimes. Depends
Sometimes.
on the people we're dealing with.
All right, excellent. And what, I mean, this is meant to be a time of celebrating success. So congratulations, it's wonderful. But always after you pass the birthday, reflect on what went well the year before. You're also looking ahead, right? So I wanted to first ask, what do you think is the biggest stumbling block to progress based on your experience in the last 2 years? And how might we begin to address it?
Sure. I think the biggest challenge that we have is that the current registration and also sometimes the contract specs and so on, because I mean, in the design, it's always in our DNA to be environment friendly and cost conscious, and value engineering is part of our DNA anyway. But sometimes if the specs or the regulation is so rigid that you can't do this and you can't do that, and even you want to change, you will perceive as you are shortchanging the client or shortchanging the regulation if you want to propose something that is optimized, for the benefit of the earth. Is they don't care. It's my contract. It's my objective to have this to be done this way. So I think to me the bigger challenge is two things. One is the understanding of the problems, because especially the geotechnical engineering, you need to really understand what is going on before you could do something to take advantage of it. But the second part is the registrations, the authority side of it, whether they'll be open-minded to accept any changes or any suggestion that we have, a good idea that we have. That's my take.
Thank you so much for that. Benjamin, do you have any views on that, maybe taking the bigger picture, like wearing a client hat or an agency hat? I mean, how might we address that challenge?
Well, I think to go to the challenge, quite often it's about being overwhelmed. Climate change is a huge topic, and just like anything, when it's a really big topic in front of you, be it from your school days of an exam and something like that, it just seems insurmountable. So the challenge has always been overcome by not aiming for perfection to start with. Aim for doing something well and learn from it and build upon it. So again, from a past policy point of view, that's where something like a green building rating tool came in. Yes, personally, not a fan of green building rating tools, even though I wrote one for 10 years or so. But you understand that actually they are a necessary evil in many ways, because they provide that framework for people to go, right, I need to hit this, and this is how I move forward with it. And once you've done that, you've broken the subject down into discrete packages, it allows you and everyone else to kind of have a common framework to move the load in the same direction. So being overwhelmed is one of the barriers. Breaking it down is a way of trying to reduce that barrier. Another one has been, and it still remains to be, the item which no one likes to talk about, which is cost. Cost and value. Externalities are still not priced in, so that's why takeaway containers are still very cheap. That's why certain building materials are still very cheap, even though they cause huge environmental damage, because it's just cheaper for the producer. But as we're moving into the mindset, as you can see, everyone is aware. So taking action on that is a key step, and it can be done without looking at without damaging the overall costs and budgets of a project. It's about how you break down those decisions and see those impacts on everything that you do.
Awesome. Can I just put a pin there? I think that it's because that's a great response, and I've noticed that in general, the presentations were focused on that what you're talking about, right? Breaking it down. Where can we actually intervene, right? So it seems like that approach seems to be the chosen path that I heard today. I'm interested as well, like what's the cultural frame for this? So how, if we feel overwhelmed and we acknowledge ourselves as, we are humans, right? We are not just professional robots. And this is a fairly safe space of community and support, right? How do you continue to stay motivated to take that transformative action and to continue to, in your new subjective view, enhance impact? What are the, I don't know, Prakash, Joe, what are the sort of conversations that you're having with maybe with your colleagues or with your clients about staying motivated and staying mission orientated?
Yeah, I can share. So yeah, I think it's important, like for Arup. So when we sign Signatory, the first thing is possibly to make sure everyone is aware of this and you explain to them why. And for us to kind of convince everyone this is important. I think climate change, a lot of people are quite clear why it's important, but how can we do it? So we share with them project examples, success stories, make it real, make it achievable for them, especially on the technical side as well. So I think that helps them to think it's workable, it's possible, because a lot of them will be probably worried that to try it first at the projects, and we share with them there's been success in other parts of the country. You just probably can implement it in a different way. I think that really helps in that sense. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe. And Prakash, I know that Web Earth has a really strong corporate, family culture. What sort of conversations or ways of working with your colleagues help keep you motivated to move forward?
Yes. So for nowadays, for all of our project, as I mentioned earlier, to whether is a requirement or not, we study for example, the structure. We study the carbon footprint of each of the option, and then of course the cost, as Benjamin mentioned, is of course another factor. We will study this also, the cost and the carbon factor, to explain the impact in the layman term, like how much is equivalent to what is the forest area or the carbon, how much we reduce with the certain option, what is the benefit to the project and the benefit to the environment by doing this. And then some of the project is like, as Benjamin mentioned earlier, is a certification. It's a client focusing on the certification and looking the points, scoring the points. But what Web Earth is working, we forgot about, first of all, we do the sustainability design. The points is automatically come. It's not like a tick the box at the beginning, at last we do. Some project we begin with the green mark platinum requirement, but due to the study over the time, some project we converted with the client interest also, we converted to net zero building project. It's a very successful story. Still the building is a good example. The SMU connection is operating at net positive at the moment.
Fantastic, and congratulations, that's such a fantastic project. And I hear you, what you're saying is really validating the thesis that Benjamin put forward. Okay, we're coming up on time. I see there haven't been any audience questions, so I would like to circle back to the exhortation that Leonard started us out with, right? We've done a lot. It's great. You're all very committed. You're being very productive. You're being very collaborative, but we can always do more, right? I know I can. So I'd love to just take a time to pass around everyone, maybe starting with women, what is next for you? If you're reflecting back in 2 years' time, what do you hope that your team at DPA will have achieved?
I think what we would like to do is try to help people build their own micro narratives on sustainability. There is a macro narrative out there, it's very clearly explained, but that sense of ownership the will, because sustainability is an uphill task. You need kind of friends, you need support to bring you forward. And only if you identify with it and build a micro narrative around your own identity, whether it's a corporate identity or a product identity, you wouldn't want to do it. And it's a big challenge because it requires changes in business models, changes in how you see yourself, pretty much. And that is the key we see. Now, some of the clients, when they say, why do I need a net zero building? And then they give me these cost reasons. But then you say, oh, look, here's how you can reposition yourself as a kind of a retail center that is green friendly. These are the customers that you're going to attract. Then they say, okay. So it's about, because humans have very low discipline, and sustainability with checkboxes is a discipline, exercise in discipline. We need stories to kind of push us forward. So I think that's what we're going to try and do. Stories, micro narratives for each person. That's what we're going to do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Leonard, can I ask you to answer your own question?
Very much.
And also we've had some feedback that your mic's a little bit quiet. If you could just lean in, that'd be awesome. Thanks.
So very much in the vein of we need a better job to convince our clients that they need to do this. And we will do this by building great projects, using innovative solutions that push boundaries, right? To show them why this will be of benefit to them. And the other thing we like to focus on is really education, right? Educating the future generations, right? And showing them the way that we are responsible for some of this, and we're going to step up, to solve some of these problems that we created.
Thanks so much. TG, Joe, Prakash, how about you? What's next for you?
Yes, so I can start. So I think for Arup globally, we have made a commitment at the COP26 last year that we'll be counting whole life carbon for all our projects going forward, new and existing. And I think the goal is probably gather enough data because we need to know how the project we're working on performs in that space, that we have enough data information to know where we're going to move next step. And we are probably going to share this with our fellow architect and client as well. So we're quite excited about this. We are rolling this program out, and I'm pretty excited what will be next. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Joe. Prakash or TG?
I think it's in time because our CEO had just released our so-called the next 3 years global strategic action plan for the next 3 years. We will make a commitment to significantly progress towards achieving our previous targets, announced science-based greenhouse gases emission reduction targets, and we try to achieve the zero emission across our value chain by 2040. Yeah? So that's what as a global, as a corporation, that's what we're committing to do. But I think to me is that besides looking at the bigger picture on all this longer term, but something more on the lower lying fruit that we could also be trying to do is to try to educate the industry to get a better understanding of especially for myself, the ground engineering parts, the education, the understanding of the problem, so that we could come up with more efficient design to save the carbon footprint. So this to me is more like low lying fruit instead of creating something new, but you're doing the conventional thing, but doing more efficiently with better understanding.
Thanks so much for articulating that, Prakash.
Yes, so as we committed to is a continuous reduction, 8% like year by year, to reduce the embodied carbon. At the same time, to I forgot to mention earlier about the tools what we developed. The IPSUM is available freely to all who would like to use the tools for the design optimization, and we will continue to develop the tools with the more option. It's really helpful to measure and optimize the design. Yeah, thank you.
All right, and I wanted to end off because we've run over time by asking Benjamin. I know you're not wearing your new professional hat on this call, But I think that the fact that you've actually moved out of the built environment now gives you a really interesting vantage point from which to reflect. And I wondered with that, wearing that, if you had a few words of advice, challenge to offer based on what you've just heard in the last hour in terms of where you, now no longer confined within the built environment, would hope that the built environment declares signatories could develop their joint efforts.
I think the key thing is to know that you're not alone. The built environment, whilst it shoulders a huge amount of the burden of climate change through its activities and the choices that it makes, it isn't alone. Every industry is going through the same paradigm shift at the moment. And as built environment professionals and those involved in the built environment, we have a huge role to play in providing those solutions. So the future isn't bleak. While it may look bleak in terms of what's projects coming on your books, delays, COVID issues and things like that, the future is actually quite bright, because the solutions that the signatories are able to provide are the solutions that the world needs, and the whole world is crying out for them. Whether it's a manufacturing plant somewhere else, it's still operating within a building or a built environment. Whether it's looking at commodities, it still feeds cities and urban areas. So all of the solutions, all of the design thinking and the technical knowledge that we have in the industry are valuable and valued outside. So the challenge I would set for everyone is to become, and I'm probably completely stealing from your book here, Sarah, so I'll put a copyright sign, Sarah, at the end, but it really is to move from being, and Huimin has said it beautifully, it's to move from being aware, it's to move from being to acting, but to becoming an agent, a real agent of change, and how your conversations with everyone can impact and have a snowball effect. Understand the choices that you make and explain them, articulate them to others. And that helps you with your agency. And then it helps others become agents. And when everyone becomes an agent of change themselves, that's when you start to see real progress.
Thanks so much. I'm gonna do a shameless plug and drop in an editorial that relates to some of that. But I, for one, am feeling so enthused by what I've heard. I really congratulate all of you for the progress that you've made, especially given the challenges of the last 2 years, right? And I think that I just thought back to what Leonard's framing, right? That it took a crisis to help to kickstart change at this scale that's necessary. And I mean, you even see that in the war, the horrible war in Eastern Europe right now. That is the crisis that it took to kickstart decarbonization of Western Europe. So how can we instead move towards, kickstarting change from a positive narrative, from creating new shared tools, and just participation, steady participation, and this collective effort that you've created, including many who are also in the audience for this call. So I don't, Shirin or Wansing, do you want to say anything in closing, or should we just finish it here?
I think that those were all really beautiful closing remarks, actually, to be honest. So just let me wrap up by thanking everyone, Sarah for moderating, and our esteemed panelists today for a really, really beautiful session. And in particular, Sarah, also thank you so much for the input at the proposal for the next upcoming session. And please take that as an encouragement. We do welcome, any kind of input and proposals for speakers, for topics to be discussed. So again, thank you all so much for being part of this, and have a wonderful evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.